colleagues. I am going to present to you one of my favorite topics today, homeschooling philosophies. This lesson is about educational philosophies related to homeschool education. Educational philosophies related to public or private school are a little bit different. If you search educational philosophies or philosophy of education, you'll most likely find educational philosophies related to public or private school. I want to share a little bit about these educational philosophies and then help you see how they are related or not related to homeschooling philosophies. A philosophy of education refers to many different aspects, including child development, how children learn, who should teach children, why we should teach them, how to teach them, what to teach them, the environment of teaching, and the history of the philosophy of education. The conclusions of these topics are largely based on the belief system of its philosophers. There are numerous educational philosophers throughout history, like Plato and Aristotle, but I want to mention a few prominent ones as it relates to America. The first philosopher is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was Swiss living in the 1700s. He was an advocate of a teacher-centered curriculum where information and concepts are learned in an effort to develop the student's character and moral sense. Students are encouraged to gain mastery and remain virtuous in society in which they live, regardless of the state of being of that society. He was also an advocate of developmentally appropriate education and development stages of child development. The second philosopher was British educator named Charlotte Mason, living in the late 1800s. She believed in a child-centered education where students are given ideas to think about through high-quality literature that spark the imagination. The next philosopher is John Dewey. He is an American living in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. His main contribution is in the realm of education was his ideas on progressive education. This was a new idea that education should be based on experiential learning in preparation for society. This was far different from what Jean-Jacques Rousseau envisioned. John Dewey believed that school is a social institution where social reform is its end goal. These are a few of the major philosophers in education. Educational philosophers are not the only ones who impacted the way education evolved. There are several key individuals involved in education who made a great impact on education in the United States. The first key individual is Noah Webster, an American English teacher known as the father of American education. He is most famous for his dictionary, the American Dictionary of the English Language, written in 1828. He also wrote a spelling book in 1783 called The Blue-Backed Speller, a grammar book in 1784, and a reader in 1785. And these were all based on his beliefs that language can be taught sequentially in stages. He believed that language is a key factor in identifying a nation, and thus America should establish its own form of English. The second key individual is Horace Mann, known as the father of American public education. He was a lawyer and politician who became the first secretary of the Massachusetts State Board of Education. Starting in 1837, he wrote annual reports to promote state-funded schools that replaced locally controlled schools through the standardization of teacher training, curriculum, and school structure. This was the beginning of the public school system in America. He believed the aim of schools is to establish civic virtue in its students or for the formation of habits that make society successful. Both these men made lasting impacts on education in America that we still feel today. Now, you might be asking how this relates to home education. Home education was common at the founding of the United States. Then it was outlawed and then legalized. The philosophy of education in the founding of the United States was largely based on the idea that a religious education was the most important type of education, and therefore, much of the education of the day, if not done by parents, was done by the clergy. The first college in America, Harvard University, started as a theological seminary in 1636. You had to know Greek and Latin and students were trained in classic literature. That's what they learned back in the 1600s and 1700s. The onset of public schools in the 1800s eventually made home education illegal, and it wasn't until 1970s and 80s where home education became legal in America. When families started homeschooling in the 1980s, the only form of education available was what the public schools were teaching. Most parents did not have access to public school curriculum and found the teachings of Charlotte Mason more applicable to the homeschool setting because of its child-centered approach, an emphasis on whole books as opposed to anthologies. Over time, and more so today, parents rejected the idea of sitting at a desk learning things by rote memorization and repetition for most of the day. They rejected the idea of one-size-fits-all approach to learning. By the 2000s, parents were writing their own curriculum and incorporating all kinds of philosophies for homeschooling. Since there was no centralized home education system run by the government, parents had the freedom to look at all the approaches to education and implement the ones that fit their family the best. I believe that home education has its own unique philosophy that says, I choose my philosophy. No philosophy is perfect. I can use whichever one best fits my family. It's good to know what philosophies of education exist today so you can better decide which one fits your family. Now I'm going to describe for you in brief common homeschool philosophies. Number one, the traditional homeschool philosophy. This approach to education is teacher-centered and closely related to what the public schools do. They have a set curriculum with lessons for the whole year, and teachers progress through each lesson as prescribed. Most of the time, students are sitting, reading, writing, and discussing with the teacher-parent until the work is done. This is good for students who love to read and write and thrive on a schedule or a pre-planned checklist. But it also works for students who need a little discipline in learning basic skills. The second homeschool philosophy is the classical approach. Classical education is also a teacher-centered approach that is closely related to private schools. There's a set curriculum with lessons to be completed, but the textbooks are chosen based on their classical nature from ancient Greece, medieval Europe, and early America. Western philosophy is its emphasis, and students learn logic, Latin, and critical thinking. This method of teaching is good for students who love to read and think deeply about philosophy, but also good for parents who want to develop their children's reasoning skills. The third homeschool philosophy is called unschooling. The families who choose this approach are families who want to give most of the control of learning to the child. As a child-centered approach, the parent is only there to guide and direct, but the child gets to choose what they study and what they do. No subject is required, and the aim is to help the child find their passion early in life so they can start being productive as early as possible. This is good for the child that is driven to seek out their own interests and has a clear understanding of what they want to learn and do. It is not a good approach for students who lack discipline in being productive. The fourth homeschooling philosophy is called eclectic. Eclectic homeschoolers are those who choose one method for one subject and another method for a different subject. It's a mixture of studying traditional subjects and non-traditional subjects. The parent decides the curriculum and subjects that best meet their child's needs. It's different from unschooling because unschooling is more child-centered. This is good for children who enjoy having different experiences and the interaction of parents. The fifth homeschooling approach is called unit study. This approach to education is where the teaching of all the subjects is learned from one unit of study that is led by the parent, therefore being teacher-directed. Parents guide the student through various lessons that require students to do various activities together, regardless of age. This is good for students who love interaction with the whole family. It also gives students a chance to explore related topics they might be interested in, which gives it a child-centered aspect to it. Now I want to address other homeschool philosophies that aren't typically seen as a philosophy of home education. The first one is the online approach or virtual school. This approach is similar to the traditional approach, but the lessons are given online by a company who develops the curriculum. Students spend most of their time in front of the computer learning traditional subjects from a company of their parents' choosing. This method is good for older students who might be seeking accreditation or younger students, 11 to 15, who need the instruction of a professional teacher. The potential problem with this method is that the students might get bored from a lack of variety and not want to continue this method long term. Also, students might not learn as much because the interaction between student and teacher is limited. Parents have to find ways to engage with their children and the curriculum. Simply buying a full program doesn't always mean you're homeschooling. The next homeschooling philosophy is public school online. Public school online is the same as public school. The curriculum is chosen by the state or government, not the parent. This is good for children whose parents don't know what to teach or how to teach and prefer convenience over autonomy. This is technically not homeschool because homeschool implies parental control. The danger of this kind of program is the risk of the child not having enough parental involvement. If you're going to homeschool, make time to be actively involved on a daily basis and make choices that are in the best interest of the child, not the school. Now, here are some of my conclusions. In today's post-pandemic world, we are way more accustomed to online learning. This lesson was about the philosophies of education in America and how they relate to homeschool education. Given the fact that homeschool education in America became legal only 40 years ago, we have the advantage of learning from the past development of education and can use whatever part of it we want. Whether it's child-centered education or teacher-centered education, both have validity and both can be used at the same time. However, they both have their pitfalls. You can choose whatever philosophy works for you, but the key here is that parents are actively involved in the day-to-day education of their children. I teach different subjects in different ways. That's it for now on Homeschooling Philosophies. I'll see you in the next video. If you like this video and want to see more content related to homeschooling from a Christian perspective, make sure you subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell to stay informed of new videos when they come out. And if you're interested in my curriculum content, teaching resources, or training services, visit my website at theprincipledteacher.com.